All right. And welcome back, guys, to the Self-Selecting Podcast. I'm your host. I am your host, Corey Hagman. Thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching, listening, wherever you are listening from, wherever you're watching from. I appreciate it. Real quick announcement, Tier 3 Patreon. If you want more bonus episodes, if you want 4 additional episodes every single month of the Self-Selecting Podcast, you can do that. You can access those on Tier 3. Tier 3 at $25, 4 episodes launching every Thursday. I think by the time this comes out, this will be soon. I'll have had Dr. Jordan Junta on the Self-Selecting Podcast, but behind the paywall, because why not? Stay tuned for more episodes. Maybe I'll be bringing on guests on Patreon episodes as well. But for today is just a solo episode. Today is just you guys and myself. What are we talking about? So oftentimes, I think when it comes to the frustration, whether it be with fat loss or building, typically it's because there is the assumption that something within the program is messed up. And for a long while, I found this part really frustrating because I've been self-coached for a majority of my time in bodybuilding. I found it frustrating because I'm like, I don't know where my attention is best put towards. I don't know how important, like compared to one another, these variables are. And I think once I was able to really collectively be like, okay, you know what? This is objectively the result that I see when I make this kind of modification. Here are the benefits, here are the drawbacks. For one, it allowed me to feel a little more at ease whenever I did run into problems, no matter the phase. But it also helped me, gain a better landscape of what options were readily available whenever things were not moving as fast as I would like them to, or just even like prophylactically, hey, what options do I have at any given point? And that's the topic. That's the topic for today. The big 4 levers, the 4 levers that we have at our disposal. And I'm going to be speaking about these in relation to fat loss. But these same levers, they're the same levers for building. So I think in terms of like actually assessing, okay, you run into a problem, your program's messed up. These are the big 4 that frankly, like they could be behind that mess up, that fuck up, whatever it is. Or they could be the solution. I guess that's a better way to say it. They could be the solution to getting more out of your program, out of your efforts. So in this video, I'm going to talk you through my thought process, the framework in which I would go about manipulating these 4 levers. So 4 levers. Number 1, diet. Number 2, training. Number 3, cardio. And 4, recovery. Now, first off, understanding, okay, figuring out which one is the limiting factor, which one is the root of the underlying issue. That is our starting point. If you want to get results and you want to get better results than you're currently getting, then I would say understanding the role that these 4 levers play in your efforts and the results that you're seeing, that's going to be paramount. And, just to start off, I think to begin, people oftentimes they assume, okay, I need to reinvent the wheel. I need to start from square one, and I need to go at each of these 4 equally as strong. And frankly, I think for many of you, it could just be a matter of adjusting your diet. Like the rest of your routine might be completely fine. There might be no room for really modifications, no necessity for modifications. It's just a matter of like, you need to eat a little bit less. You need to get nutrition and your diet in check. And my thought process is first, identifying, okay, which of the levers is the issue, but attacking that one and keep pushing that one until you get it functional within your system. And frankly, we find the thing that works in each of these domains. And then from there, and I'm like, well, also making sure that it doesn't like detract or take away from any of the other levers. But like fundamentally, that makes the most sense. And like, I can tell you that if it's diet, I mean, like, we can talk about tweaking your meals, switching food sources, looking at the composition of each food. But for some people, that is just going to mean like tracking your diet. And I've said this, to death at this point, like I've beat it to death. You can't manage what can't be measured. If you are not tracking your diet, there's nothing to bitch about. There's nothing to complain about. And I know that might seem a little harsh, but it's brutal advice, and it's brutal advice I wish I would have received earlier in my career, like within the realm of like me coaching myself, like, pursuing physique goals. If someone had just told me at the beginning, like, hey, like, even if you eat it, even if you've tracked like what you plan to eat, if you eat something differently, what you eat is what matters. Your body is going to take an allotment. It's going to keep a really tight checks and balances on what goes into your mouth that has calories. And frankly, like if you're not able to be honest with yourself and record and actually like reflect on like, hey, this is what I'm consuming, you don't really have a lot of, you don't have a lot of leg to stand on in terms of complaining about like, okay, I'm not losing fat as fast as I'd like, or frankly, I'm not building any muscle. Like, I wonder why that is. Just under the umbrella of diet, like there are different aspects and ways that we can attack and we can modify how you're approaching diet. But I would say the big fuck up that a lot of people make is that they're not tracking, or if they are tracking, they're not tracking accurately. So when I say tracking, I mean tracking your calorie intake, tracking your macronutrient intake. I don't know why saying macronutrient, that sounded a little southern, almost like I was like a really exaggerated form of micronutrient. But micros, we also should be tracking those to some extent. Personally, I use the app Chronometer. I'm a big fan of that. I think it does a great job. Like the user interface is really, really nice. I pay for the $15 a month one. I'm a big fan of that. But it'll actually give you a breakdown of what micros you're missing. So, I mean, like if it's like copper to zinc, like it'll give you like, here's where you're falling in between this, which is important for some individuals like myself who have a copper IUD. Same thing though, across the board, vitamins, minerals, it'll tell you where the holes are in your diet. And essentially that's giving you then the ability, the autonomy, the awareness to then make those changes. But past diet, when you look at training, I mean, like maybe the adjustment that you need to make is the training split itself. Maybe the training split itself is not conducive with your goals. And if you don't have specific goals as to like how, I mean, I'm assuming you're wanting to build for hypertrophy and you're not like building for a strength performance program. Maybe you are, maybe you're like Jordan and you're like, hey, I'm trying to get really fucking strong, but that means I need to have more muscle in order to be really fucking strong. And if that's the case, cool. But this conversation is specific to the individual who's looking to build their body, looking to build their physique in a way that's very conducive with having more muscle for generally aesthetic purposes. Like that's one of the primary goals. And if that's the case, knowing exactly where you want that muscle on your frame, that is paramount. That is like you must know. Like, I mean, simply just saying I want to have more muscle. If you come to me and tell me that, like, I mean, like I standardly will assume that you mean, okay, I want a generally imbalanced physique that reflects a bikini competitor. But if you came to me and you were like, hey, I want not a bikini bodybuilding type physique, I just want a truly standard day-to-day average person gen pop physique that has muscle, but even has muscle in areas that frankly like bikini would not want muscle in, i.e. triceps, biceps, abdomen, quads, calves. Like, okay, well then that programming is going to look very different than someone who's like, just want glutes, just want shoulders, I want a little bit of back, want a little bit of leg, but not in a high ratio relative to glutes. Completely different training splits. You've also got exercise selection, which is important if you've been doing things incorrectly, which I think at this point you guys kind of know. Like I beat this to death as well. I've beat a lot of things to death. I'm going to keep doing that because I feel like it's necessary. If the exercise selection doesn't make sense, okay, that means that you need to change it. in my time coaching, in my time doing this professionally, I can say that like very few people have come to me in a position where they are doing everything correctly. And like more specifically, the exercise selection is that in which it needs to be. Like it's conducive with them getting the most out of a training program and the most efficient way, most effective method for their efforts. A lot of people's training sucks major dicks. And I mean, that's just the reality. It's just not very good. It's taking a very high volume program and in lieu of intensity, putting a ton of volume in place that ultimately kind of digs you into this like just like this anti-recovery like hole. And frankly, from there, like what you're going to go into a prep and like, oh, you're just going to manage that same degree of recovery that you're not recovering from in your off season. That doesn't make sense. So exercise selection, training split, those are two big areas I think that people can make improvements in. And I, kind of alluded to this earlier or just a moment ago, lifting heavier, lifting in a way that that warrants the amount of food that you're eating, lifting in a way that is not indicative that you were just trying to maintain muscle. That's really where I think the distinction needs to be made. If you are just lifting in a way that essentially allows the muscle that you have to just chill, to just stay where it's at and to not adapt, that's an area for improvement. It's an area you should exploit. And frankly, I mean, like, I think the more specific we can get with what this actually looks like and how this actually feels, I think the more you're going to be able to develop that skill as an athlete. And that very much is a skill. And it's one that I think is often untapped. And we kind of just, look the other way because we're like, oh, like a bikini, like we don't need to lift heavy because it might build the muscle in the way we don't want it. It doesn't work like that. Last thing, adding or reducing sets. I know it might seem insane adding sets. Okay, well, in the case that like you have not enough volume, sure, maybe we need to add sets. Maybe you have specific goals that we don't have enough sets in place. And when I say sets, I mean working sets. I don't mean warm-up sets. Warm-up sets are designed to get you ready for the working sets. Working sets are the ones that I love how this was framed. I think it was Jordan who framed this way recently. I've said this before, is like if you can think of like other shit going on in your brain, like in your life while you're doing a set, it's not a working set. If you can, and this is what Jordan said. He's like, if you can finish a set literally because you're just like, I'm done. Like I've completed the number of reps, but like you're ending the set literally because you hit a number, not because technically you are now at failure. Like, probably wasn't high enough intensity. Why wasn't it a high enough intensity? Probably for the fact you weren't using enough weight. If you, let's say, stuck within the target rep range, it might be something that we need to work on. We might need to be able to work on your ability to execute and predict what weight is going to allow you to reach the appropriate intensity within that specific number of sets, that specific number of reps. Reducing sets, I'm a big fan of just going to someone's training being like, what is all this doing here? Why are we hoarding sets? Like, why do we have 6 sets of hip thrust? Like, maybe there's a reason we have 6 sets of hip thrust. Maybe there is, but I want to hear the explanation. I want to understand why we have that. And we have no RDL in your program whatsoever. We've got a lot of hip thrust, but we have no squat pattern. Okay. So past training is cardio. Maybe you are not doing enough cardio. Maybe the cardio is not intense enough. Or maybe the type of cardio, again, just sucks. Like it's not a good type of cardio. It's just a poor selection. Now, what do I mean by this? Doing more. Okay. So do you need to do more? In the case of fat loss, I mean, like you have these people, I've run into them quite frequently where they're like, I don't want to do any cardio. And because of that, I would rather just like chop my food, out the gate, just super low. And then we'll just sit here. I get that. And I respect that. I respect it because food is going to be the thing that is more accurate in terms of depicting the kind of deficit that we're going to be in. However, doing some cardio could allow you to keep more food in place, which ultimately could allow you to perform better in your training, which is ultimately the thing that's going to allow you to keep muscle on your frame. So I'm not a fan of like having absolutely no cardio in. And I'm a little weirded out when people are like, I don't want to do any cardio. I'm like, what? Like, it's not like I'm not going to make you run. Like, you don't even have to fucking do the Stairmaster. Just get on the treadmill. Just like set it to 5%. Like, I don't know. Answer text messages, scroll on Instagram. Like, this isn't like, we're not talking about high intensity cardio. And maybe that's the out the gate, what I need to come out with and be like, hey, it's not running. It's not sprints. It's not fucking battle rope. Like, it's pretty manageable. With that being said, increasing intensity. Some people will, be like, yeah, I do 25,000 steps a day. But in order to hit that, I am on the treadmill and I'm doing 0% incline at like, I don't know, 2 miles an hour. And I'm like, why are you wasting so much time on the treadmill at like such a moderate low intensity? Or actually, no, an indescribably low intensity. And in that case, it's like, I know some, and I don't know, it's not even me I'm not trying to be funny. People who have those really high activity rates on any given day, I almost want to be like, okay, I think like the duration, yeah, that might be there, but the intensity, like it's not. And if we were to increase intensity, that could in turn get you a little bit more out of your fat loss efforts because you're going to be burning more calories. And now we freed up some of that time that you were spending doing cardio previously, and the assumption that it's structured and not just like, I don't know, a consequence of like your job or your just day-to-day life. We could free some of that time up and you could be recovering. You could be doing things that are more productive. Okay, cool. That's what I want to see. The other thing, trying different types of cardio. And I actually mean this more in the way of like the individual who's like married to the Stairmaster, who's like, that's the one I use because I like getting a good sweat. I like feeling pain. I like, just being exhausted. And it's like, I get that. I understand it. There was a time where very much I was losing body fat and like a good chunk of my cardio was coming from the Stairmaster. And that can be okay. Yes, but not in the essence in which it's taking away from your ability to recover, which it absolutely will do. So if you have like 180 minutes or 240 minutes of weekly total cardio that you need to do, and a good portion of that is Stairmaster, I may suggest let's switch to a lower intensity steady state, something that is a little easier to recover from. And even though you're not going to be burning as many calories, what we can do is take that fuel that is now being burned through to just get through the Stairmaster. We can take some of it and reallocate it towards training performance. Again, like I said, it's ultimately going to keep more muscle on your frame. That is something that we have to uphold. We have to have high integrity around training performance. So in terms of just like sucking like up all that food, all of those calories, and like shuttling it, like keeping it in reserve for cardio, I'm not as big of a fan of that. And especially when we talk about like cardio is going to have exponentially more of a cost. It's going to have a higher cost the leaner you get and the longer you've been doing it. So it's not something that I tend to prescribe as like, hey, as a baseline, I just have everyone do stairs because it burns more calories. Well, yeah, no shit it does. There's just not good, like there's not a lot of thought that goes in past it burns a lot of calories. Yes, it does, but there is a consequence associated with that. Now, whatever it is that we're doing, whatever kind of modification that we're making to your program, in some way you need to understand how it's affecting whatever specific lever we're talking about. So if it doesn't map back to one of these 4 levers, why are we doing it? Like if, for example, if you think like adding a recovery day is going to help you feel stronger in your workouts, okay, maybe it will. But hear me out. If you were thinking of adding a recovery day to and help prove training performance, it's kind of like, well, what's being done on the recovery aspect rather than look to what we can add in place. What can we take away? So is it possible that you are doing so much cardio or workouts that are like so late at night, or you're having stimulants later in the day that ultimately are impeding sleep? And if that's the case, can we make a correction there before essentially taking away one of your training days, adding in an extra recovery day to ultimately drive training performance? Is there something that we could do that could get the same effect by, potentially either sleeping better or managing stress better? And if not, then yeah, maybe like the answer is to take the recovery day. But if you can get better results by just tweaking something else, like in the diet or the training, or just from a overall like scheduling systems standpoint, I would do that instead. And kind of like what I was saying before, I think the thing that people get really lost in the mix is they think that more is always better. And there are times where more is necessitated and more is absolutely what you need to do. But I think a lot of people get hung up on like, okay, I'm just going to add more training volume, or I'm going to add more cardio. But here's why that's not always the best move. If you push past your recovery capacity, especially in a fat loss phase when you are in a state of low energy availability, your performance is going to be affected by this. Your ability to recover will be affected by this. And you're going to hit a wall where eventually fatigue builds so high that that cardio then backfires, that you're not able to perform at the same consistency or with the same consistency at the same output. Your hunger signaling is going to go up. Adherence could absolutely go down. I think that's very plausible. And you end up creating a deficit that isn't sustainable, one that ultimately you can't adhere to because now you have this input, the very high amount of cardio or a very high amount of training that ultimately is fucking up the system. It's moving you off the tracks. Now, you've got to weigh the opportunity cost here. If you're doing more, it needs to be because collectively it is allowing you to perform better. Not that it's just allowing you to get better results in the intermediary or acutely, but it needs to be considered whether doing more is going to come at the expense of recovery, because given that is one of our big pillars that ultimately is going to affect your ability to lose fat faster. Now, ultimately, the deficit, the calorie intake, that is the most predictable and the most accurate lever that you can control. Calories do not change in value. Calories are generally consistent. I mean, like, sure, there is a discrepancy in the calories that you consume. Like, if you don't know this, buckle in. There's like a 10 to 20% discrepancy in packaged food. So even though you might scan it and be like, yeah, it's 130 calories for an Aussie bite. Not always. Not all Aussie bites are created equally. So if you set a reasonable deficit, if you go into this idea that like, okay, I'm going to lose 1 pound of fat per week, that means that in order to do so, you need to be in a 500 calorie deficit. Now, this is pretty reasonable for most people. But if you go in without this game plan, let's say you go in the way that, like, I mean, frankly, a lot of people do. They're just like, I want to lose 5 pounds. So they're already thinking down the line, I want to lose 5 pounds. And they're like, I don't have a timeline. I just want to lose it. So however it needs to be done, I just want to get it done. This is a surefire way to commit to a deficit, one that you can't actually stick to, that ultimately is going to make it very, very difficult to adhere to, ultimately putting you in a position where buy-in out the gate is going to be rocky at best, but likely low. And in the case that you are just like, okay, I'm going to lose 5 pounds, whatever I have to do, I'm just going to do it. So I'm going to jack up my cardio. I'm going to put myself in a 1,000 calorie deficit or 1,500 calorie deficit. It's like, congratulations, you might be able to follow that for a very short duration, but eventually something is going to break. And really, when we're talking about doing more, we have to respect that there are ceilings in which we can create a deficit. We can't create a deficit that is too large. Otherwise, why would you not just fast until you're 5 pounds lighter? So this is where you really have to understand, like, adherence is everything. Now, what erodes adherence? The answer, dietary fatigue. Dietary fatigue, and, sure, you could say training fatigue, any kind of output that is skewing hunger signaling. Now, dietary fatigue, that starts, like, that's kind of like a clock that just begins the moment you say, I am dieting. Like, the moment you tell yourself, like, I'm on a diet, I'm in a fat loss phase. Like, the perception of dieting is what ultimately drives dieting fatigue. Now, whether or not you're fully committed, so you have those people on the end of this spectrum, that's like, okay, I'm going to start dieting and, we're just going to, slowly, like, I'm gonna dip my toe into it. And then what do you know? They're like 8 months into a diet. They've lost like maybe, 7 to 10 pounds. And maybe their original goal was like 25, 30. And they're like, yeah, like I've gotten results, but I'm tapped out at this point. I respect the slower approach because I think for some people it is needed. I think for most people, though, what it does is it puts them in diet jail. It puts them in a perception of like, I need to lose weight and I need to do it in a way that's linear and I'm just going to be stuck here until I reach this destination. Whereas if they, maybe we'll just go with this example. They go to diet jail and they're like, okay, I'm only going to do my time. I'm only going to be in here for max, 8 weeks, and I'm going to do my time as hard as I need to do it. Like, I'm going to pay my dues. I don't know where this analogy is going, so bear with me. And really at this point, like I know at 8 weeks, I'm out. So I only have the ability while I'm in this phase to lose the fat that I'm aiming to lose. So in that case, if you have, let's say you're in this phase for, I don't know, you have, do I want to use the 8 week example? Let's just say you were losing 10 pounds over the course of 8 weeks. Okay. So whether you lose the 10 pounds or not, you're only spending those 8 weeks in that phase, only in diet jail for 8 weeks for those 10 pounds. And you're coming out after 8 weeks, you're like, I'm done. No matter if I lost 4 pounds, no matter if I lost 5. If that's the case, if you went in with that mindset, like this is the allotted time that I'm allowed to lose weight, I think the perspective on this and the commitment would be very different, rather than this transient approach of like, it's April, I'm going to try to get in the best shape of my life by the end of the year. And like, even if that means I'm going to spend 3/4 of the year, like in a fat loss phase, it's like, that's a very aimless plan. It's very intuitive. And frankly, I think when it comes to fat loss, we need to, for most people, for healthy individuals, I think we need to take a less intuitive approach and something that does make sense, that is based and rooted in logic and rationale rather than just emotions and hunger signaling. Because for most people, hunger signaling is going to be heavily skewed. Now, I think the other aspect when it comes to diet that is oftentimes overlooked is how important it is to hit the diet hard from the beginning, because like I said, that dietary fatigue, it is going to accumulate. And regardless of whether you lose the weight that you intend to lose or you lose half of that, you are going to have the perception that I have dieted. Like I have been in a diet. And it's what kills me is that like people can be getting into like a contest prep or fat loss phase, non-contest prep, and they can be like, no, I've been dieting for 6 weeks, but the scale only reads that they've lost like 2-3 pounds. And I'm like, you might believe that you have been dieting, but you're not doing a good job of it. Like it's not been a hard diet. It's not been effective. You've been doing it relatively passively, kind of in the background. And if you continue to lose at such a slow pace, I mean, ultimately, if you have that deadline, if you have that hard line in the sand, like, hey, this is when I'm ending the diet, no ifs, ands, or buts, like I'm ending the diet at this point, well, you're probably going to fall short of your goal. Or in the case that it is a hard deadline and you must be in shape, like let's say with the show, maybe you do get to the point where ultimately you do have to take extremes in order to get in shape as quickly as you need to. I think honestly, most people, they tend to get upset. I think really the only time people get upset is when their expectations are unmet. And I think that's where, going into it, what I find to be really helpful with clients is to be like, yo, honestly, like if you want to lose at this pace, this is what this looks like. Let me forecast it out for you. Let me just like show you. I'll put the formula in and you can see if you lose at 0.5 pound a week, I mean, it's real simple. It's not going to take you it's going to take you, honestly, the rest of the year to get to where you want to be. Now, this is the degree of a sacrifice that will require that you make. It's not, this is terrible. It doesn't come without a sacrifice. I was going to say sacrificeless. It is not like there certainly is still a cost that you have to pay. And that's where I would rather someone just commit to paying that cost in a very efficient and very streamlined manner than them drag it out and ultimately find that, wow, even though I'm paying such small cost, over time, it's harder to pay this cost because of that fatigue accumulating in the background. Now, I think when the results don't really match the expectations, that ultimately is when adherence usually takes an even bigger hit. That's the point in which someone's going to be like, yeah, you know what? Okay, even though I've been paying this small cost, I've kind of earned being off track. And that, what do you think will happen? Okay, that's going to put you in a position where now you're non-adherent. Now that can either become a habit that you build, that every time you have that bad feeling, you become non-adherent, you go off track. And eventually you're going to go so far off track that it fucks up, like it undoes the cost that you were paying. You put yourself in a position where ultimately now, like, you're paying a cost that now that cost in the background is kind of growing bigger because you're doing things that ultimately force you to take multiple steps back, even though you technically at this point should be much further ahead than you are. And like the other aspect to this is the belief out the gate. People will say things like, okay, I've never been adherent to a diet for more than 2 weeks. Like the idea that you want me to go without cheat meals for, an indefinite amount of time. It's not to say forever, but it's just like, okay, we're going to start this program without cheat meals. Or even the thought like, okay, I've never gone without a cheat meal for more than 7 to 10 days. I've never gone to bed hungry. I always just end up breaking and giving into cravings. Like there are levels that you get to in this like journey, in this pursuit of changing your physique, and each one is going to require that you break through that barrier. And I think it's Jim Quick who says this. I really like it. It's like, if you fight hard enough for your limits, eventually you get to keep them. And ultimately, I think the problem that many of us have is that you hold on to these beliefs like they're absolute truths, like they can't be altered. But really, they're just stories that we tell ourselves, that honestly, they keep us stuck and keep us in the same place. But it's these same beliefs, they're indoctrinated over time, and they're shaped from either past failures, what you see other people do, what you hear other people have to sacrifice in order to achieve X, Y, and Z. And ultimately, these are what are influencing our ability to want to or to not want to adhere to the diet. What I found is that like every time that you stick to your diet a little bit longer, every time that you skip that cheat meal, that like, maybe you're like, oh, I shouldn't take this at this point, even though it's what I've already done previously. And I'm not saying like kind of deviating on your own, accord, but like, telling your coach like, hey, I want a cheat meal, but actually like listening to like, okay, do I need this? Is this in line with the goals that I have at this point? Am I ahead enough to where even if I have this cheat meal and it set me back like a little bit, is that something that ultimately I would benefit from? Like, what is the global? Is it a net positive or a net negative? And I think these beliefs are ones that ultimately you really do have to actively work at chipping away at, because like you ultimately developed these beliefs because you have evidence, or even like, I'm going to call it like fictitious evidence. You have basically decided that this is the best effort that you have at this point. And you continue to embed these, and like you're proving to yourself that you can essentially, do what it is that you want to do, but under these conditions. And I think ultimately the more that you can challenge these beliefs and tell yourself like, okay, well, I've never done it before. Like historically, I've never been able to go to bed hungry or go 4 consecutive weeks without a cheat meal. I think it's all about like stacking up these small wins and ultimately providing that evidence for yourself over an extended period of time, that allows you to rewrite these stories. And the goal isn't to be perfect. Like it's the progress that you make, however incremental. It's not going to be linear, and I can't stress that enough, so that a lot of people, they do assume that, okay, well, you have these tools and you're someone that either can do it or you can't. But I think the more that you push through what you impose on yourself, these stories that you tell yourself, the more you begin to realize how much control you actually have over your perception of what it is that you're doing. Now, I think another common misconception is individuals feel very entitled to progress, like a blanket level of progress. They're like, I will take that. I will take 1 pound lost per week, regardless of what the cost is for them. And now the cost, like we can intellectualize this and make it very specific. The cost to lose 1 pound of body fat per week is a 500 calorie deficit a day. Now, how you create that deficit and what that day-to-day cost is for you is going to look different in terms of what is required to create that 500 calorie deficit. And I don't even mean in the sense like, okay, for someone who is used to doing a lot of cardio, but also having a high food intake, that cost might mean being a little more methodical with food being slightly lower and accepting that, okay, you're not going to get to have this like macro bowl or these, laundry list of snacks, readily at hand at night, because frankly, like that ultimately is what you're doing. Like you're hoarding an additional 600-700 calories at night, which in turn, to compensate for that, you're having to do a bunch of cardio in order to allow yourself to have that food at night. Maybe instead we back off the cardio a little bit, we bring the food down so where you're only eating what you would deem as like necessary to create that 500 calorie deficit. But in turn, having a lower cardio requirement per week is going to ultimately allow you to train better, allow you to keep more muscle on your frame, allow you to recover better. I think a lot of people, they don't understand past the point of, okay, I need to restrict food, but what is the actual cost? And I think the more specific you can be with yourself around like what that actually looks like, what that entails, I think the better prepared you're going to be, and the lower likelihood you're going to have unmet expectations. So people, they want to see, yes, they want to see the scale drop, but we can all agree if you're in a fat loss phase, if you're not seeing the scale drop, ultimately that's going to be pretty discouraging. But are you willing to do the things that are oftentimes exactly what needs to happen to ensure you don't fall off track, you don't fail the diet? So this could mean making sure that there is accuracy in the food reporting. So if you're not used to using a scale, this could very well mean using a scale at all turning points, because you know that you have the tendency to eyeball things, and when you're a little hungrier, how you size things up and your depth of perception, it becomes a little skewed. This can also mean that like instead of skipping logging, instead of choosing to not account for the little extras like the sauces or the condiments, or when you go out to eat, like knowing, okay, well, I know this food has a little more fat than what is actually reflected in my Fitness Pal, but you know what, fuck it, I'm just gonna go with the log because that allows me to still have the almond butter late at night, even though looking at this food, like for sure there were like 2 ounces of butter put on this chicken. It's like, yes, I know like you technically didn't order it that way, but if that's what you're eating, if you're eating food that is ultimately going to contain more calories and you're kind of turning the other cheek to it, it's like those calories are accounted for in your body. Like your body is going to be very accurate, very honest with you around your total intake. Now, another area is going to be food selection. So continuity in food selection. I can't tell you how many people that I've worked with them for long periods of time. And like I found out down the road, I'm like, oh, you're tracking net carbs and you're tracking macros. Okay, well, this makes a lot of sense why you're not losing weight as readily as I would assume. And that's one that like, I know there's controversy around. I know people will say, well, like I'm not consuming these carbs, are not being stored, so like why can't I subtract them? I know there's science to support it, but frankly, unless you are hitting the same foods every single day, there is a discrepancy in how many of those carbs are excreted and absorbed. And I would say generally is if you're someone who the hunger signaling is getting higher, if you're in a contest prep, if you're in a deep fat loss phase, this isn't a position that I would put you in that I would expect you to have high integrity with, because frankly, it is all too easy to make these adjustments to your meal plan, to your macros for the day, to support foods that, yeah, you can technically log as foods that are not going to contain the same carb source. But frankly, how can we be 100% sure that there aren't trace carbs being absorbed? And if that's making up a bulk of the carbs that you're eating for that day, it makes complete sense why we might see discrepancies in your fat loss that week. Now, I think another issue involved in like just inconsistencies are weigh-ins. And I think a lot of people, they don't realize the importance of having something that is objective and measured day to day, but also reflected and interpreted based on the average compared to the range and how that changes week to week. And this is something that like people will get kind of hung up on and be like, okay, well, I don't like the idea of having to weigh myself every day. Like mentally that causes a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress. And I think for me personally, like I was that individual, so I can empathize. I would get very emotional if I saw that scale weight fluctuate day to day, despite being 100% adherent. I think once I was able to normalize seeing those fluctuations and understand that even if I'm 100% adherent, those fluctuations are absolutely expected and are not indicative that I did anything wrong, which, I mean, like, as I'm saying it, it's like you have to learn how to not take scale weight personally. Like, scale weight is as objective as it comes. It does not tell the full story. And when you can begin to distill out that this is strictly just the total weight that you are carrying around on your body at any given point. It is not telling you a body fat percentage. It's not telling you an adherence rate, which oftentimes I think people tend to associate scale weight in the trend day to day is a reflection of whether or not you worked hard enough or you did enough the previous day. And that is just so false. I think that having a reliable system to weigh in and a weigh-in schedule that ultimately sets you up so that you do weigh in whether or not digestion is regular, whether or not sleep is abnormal or not, I think that's absolutely essential. And yes, I'm going to recommend that people they aim to weigh themselves at the same time each and every day, ideally first thing in the morning, after using the bathroom, under similar conditions. And if you do have wild fluctuations in sodium, in fluid balance, or even like sleep patterns, even stress levels, like of course, like these things are going to impact that weigh-in. And what I recommend, and it's something that I struggled with a long time, but it really, like, once I was able to get control of it, I was like, okay, this is much less exhausting to feel like seeing that weigh-in is now going to dictate how I eat today. When I was able to remove that and just say like, nope, this is just a data collection. Like I am a worker for my coach, who I also am. I am the coach, and my boss, my coach, needs me to take my weigh-in 7 days a week, and I need to not get emotional about it. I can have feelings about it. I can be like, yeah, it kind of fucking bums me out. I thought I was going to weigh less. But before making that assumption, before jumping to that conclusion around, well, I don't weigh less because I didn't do enough, I'm going to collect 7 data points and then make that assessment. And rather than judge my low weigh-in off my high weigh-in last week, I'm going to look at my weekly average, which is based on 7 data points. I'm going to consider whether or not there was any muddying or inflation of the weigh-ins that is like objectively artificial. And if that's the case, okay, I don't get to get upset about that because that is not an accurate weigh-in. And I think that's where, if you are able to make that separation and be like, okay, this weigh-in is not accurate. It is falsified. It is like this summary of data is reflected of 3 nights of shitty sleep, getting my like, if you can do that, I promise you will experience a lot less of like the mental anguish that comes with taking your scale weight day to day. Now, the reality is a lot of people, they're going to hear this and they're going to be like, that is insane. That is way too much data collection and it's unnecessary. We should just be able to go off visuals, go off pictures. Fine, do it then. Fine, go off of that. But I'm telling you, for myself, for the clients I work with, I want to have some certainty in how I'm doing, like just an objective measure of like, how well is this diet going? Like how good am I doing at this fat loss thing? And I think one, in terms of having buy-in to a process that like you can expect to be hungry, you can expect to want to eat more than what you're currently eating. And if that's the case, I want to set myself up so that going into this diet, I have that as a reasonable expectation, but I have some like positive reinforcement to be like, well, yeah, this might suck dick, but like, frankly, because I know that I'm going to see that average scale weight go down week to week, ultimately, it's worth however uncomfortable it is to potentially feel hungry, to potentially feel like, you know, okay, like I don't feel my tightest, I'm not quite where I want to be, whatever the mental or physical discomfort is. If you have that positive reinforcement that, like, frankly is predicated on having the set expectations at the beginning of the diet, ultimately, I think it's going to put you in a better position to see out the remaining time that you have left of the diet. I think without this level of precision, but mostly the consistency, you honestly are just setting yourself up for disappointment. And if you do have wild swings in adherence, I think sticking to the plan one day and then going off the rails the next, I mean, like your progression and like your rate of change week to week, it's fucked. Like it's inconsistent at this point. So it's not just about doing more. It's not just about doing harder things. I have said this for a long time, like you don't get points for suffering, like you get points for doing things consistently and doing the right things consistently. But I think the entitlement to faster progress or better progress without matching the effort is a mindset that honestly needs reevaluating. Like, real progress is going to come from commitment to the process. And the things that make the process, I would say, like relatively more predictable are tracking, consistency, and refining the approach that when things like aren't working, looking at them, auditing, assessing, and trying something new, being able to identify, okay, what is the limiting factor? Why did this occur? What are my options? What are my potential solutions here? And I think when you start doing the work correctly, I think when you start doing more of the correct things, this is when the results really do follow. But it all starts with taking ownership around out the gate, the consistency and the accuracy in which you're reporting food and the accuracy in which you are collecting changes in your physique. So I think one, when you figure out of these 4 levers, what are the things that you need to work on? Which is the thing that you need to work on? Which is the biggest constraint? That ultimately is my thought process here. If your diet's spot on, but you're finding that like, okay, like, cardio is kind of kicking my ass. And actually, it is making it to where hunger signaling is, skewed more heavily than I would like. Okay, what can we modify? Can we bring cardio down? And then what needs to happen if we're going to bring cardio down? Do we also need to bring diet down? Do we need to bring caloric intake down? If accuracy in food reporting is spot on, then it should be as simple of an exchange there. And we might find that ultimately bringing the cardio down allows for better recovery. If recovery is the lever that we need to pull, okay, does that come from decrease in cardio, or is there a lifestyle modification that ultimately is going to allow you to get more sleep, get better sleep? Are you able to take further advantage of a rest day that maybe right now you're like, oh, it's an active rest day, so I'm gonna go do a fucking hike and I'm gonna go get 25,000 steps, and like, oh, I'm also gonna only eat like, just I get it. Like, I see this in excess, I see this at very high volumes, but really I think like if you've nailed the recovery and still aren't seeing fat loss, and honestly, if diet is spot on and cardio is on the lower side, maybe it makes sense to address, like, does cardio need to be modified? Is there the ability to be more accurate in how we're tracking cardio? Is there the ability to do a higher amount of cardio that doesn't offset training performance or skew hunger signaling? And like, I think it's easy to get into this mindset of like, can we do more? Can we do things better? Or is there something entirely new that we should do? And frankly, I think once you find something that works, I mean, like this order is like the way I would go about it is like, can you do more of the things that guarantee work? Okay, great. Exploit that first. Unless you have the ability to do a better job. Can you do a better job at doing the things that work? In that case, okay, maybe it is worth, before doing more, doing things better. Is there a new thing that you can do? This is the one that I tend to shy away from, only in the essence that like there is more that can be done, or we can do things better. And in the case, like, if it's working, I wouldn't seek for these like fringe methodologies that ultimately require downtime in acclimating to whatever kind of systemic fatigue is going to occur. And that's where like you'll see people be like, well, I want to start carb cycling, I want to start intermittent fasting, I want to start doing a form of cardio that ultimately just wrecks me for my session. And obviously they're not saying that, they're just like, yeah, I want to do the Jacob's ladder, I want to do Stairmaster for 60 minutes, or hey, I want to, on my rest days, I want to go on this hike but also make sure that I'm burning a lot of calories because I don't want to have my next weigh-in to be higher. You will see that most of the time, if you just do things better, you don't need to do more of them. If you do things to the best of your ability and you do them correctly, you can do that in lieu of doing more to an extent. And then knowing that, okay, there's nothing that I can do better, from there you can make that progression. Can I do more? Yes, there's a ceiling. There's absolutely a ceiling there. And I would say like it needs to be respective to what lever it is we're pulling. The hardest part, the absolutely hardest part about fat loss is committing to the things that work well, committing to the things that we know that guarantee work. And then at the point in which you need to make a change, like you need to do more, resisting the urge to change trajectories, resisting the urge to try something brand new. And then at that point, like scaling the fuck out of what it is that you're doing and maximizing, in this case, okay, if recovery isn't maximized, maximizing that to a point that allows you to, let's say, train harder, that allows you to potentially do more cardio. And there's a point where you have less and less runway to work with. And ultimately, this is what needs to be respected based on the phase that you're in. At the end of prep, recovery is going to have to be maxed out. And even if recovery is maxed out, I can tell you hunger signaling is likely going to be heavily skewed even then. Even post-show. Post-show, you're going to be in a position, even though food will be up, you would expect, okay, well, food is up. I'm not doing as much cardio. Why isn't hunger signaling? God, I'm really struggling with that. Why isn't hunger signaling following suit? And with that, it's like respective to the phase that you're in, to the amount of dietary fatigue that you've accrued, to the amount, the duration in which you've been in this state of low energy availability. And frankly, the answer might be at that point, deciding that, okay, I've exceeded my global recovery capacity for whatever phase it is that I'm in. And the same rule of thumb applies to building. If you are someone who's struggling to get in all the food, if you're struggling to, let's say even just tolerate, like you're finding that the weight gain, you're finding that the discomfort of being heavier, okay, that's becoming a point of contention where it is affecting your training. Yes, there are these same levers that we can pull on, and there's these same levers that, might take a different approach, but essentially we get to the point where we've reached that max capacity. And the best piece of advice that I've gotten is folding before you're forced to fold. Folding before you have to because you get injured, because you hit this new low. I mean, like figuratively, where you're just like, I don't enjoy this anymore. The hardest part about all this is continuing to stay consistent with the things that work. And I think many people, they find something that works. They realize, okay, it fucking sucks. Like the more advanced I get in this, climbing of the ladder, and then they get distracted by new things, by shiny things that sound more appealing because frankly, they are at the new things are at a lower skill buy-in. Like you don't have to be that good at them to do them at least once and to get that novelty, to get that return. Identifying the biggest constraints amongst the diet, the training, the cardio, the recovery, focus on improving that and keep scaling what's going to work for you. But ultimately, I think you have to keep your actions aligned and respect that each phase there is going to be a point in which you're no longer productive. And the idea being to end the phase before you get to that point. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, I will see you in the next one.